This week on Capital Connection, DCFS is under the microscope again.
I think the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services and the Illinois Child Welfare system is one of the best child welfare systems in the country.
Lawmakers grilled the department for hours over the findings of the latest report from the Auditor General's office.
He's delusional. The bottom line is, most states' directors of DCFS have not been, held in contempt of court by judges a dozen times.
And it was a big week for the marijuana market in Illinois. Licenses are finally issued 2 years after they were supposed to be, and the state raked in record revenue.
When we saw the line on the first day of the opening of the recreational marijuana being wrapped around corners, we knew that this was going to be a cash cow in Illinois.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol reporter Cole Hankey is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Cole Hankey. Earlier this week, lawmakers grilled DCFS officials for hours after a scathing report found that the Department of Children and Family Services was failing to meet some of its most basic tasks. For the first time since a scathing audit found DCFS failed to meet standards, Director Mark Smith took questions from lawmakers. Smith is standing by his department.
We will keep moving and progressing forward. We are reviewing those findings about annual audits. We will aggressively make sure that our staff, that our supervisory staff and managers who have reporting staff are completing those audits in a timely fashion.
Smith says there are around 20,000 kids in DCFS care. In a random sample of 50 of those children, 18% were missing at least one physical examination, and 88% were missing a dental examination.
I don't need a PhD to tell me to get a kid to their doctor appointment, right? You don't need a PhD in some fancy academic study to tell you to make sure they're getting their dental exams on time.
The Auditor General also found DCFS failed to conduct home visits in 98% of cases. The home visits are required under Tanaja's law. The state passed that law in 2019 after the death of 2-year-old Tanaja Barnes in Decatur. She died from neglect after DCFS returned her to the home they took her from. Despite all of the shortcomings listed in the audit, Smith says he still has the governor's support.
Governor Pritzker, I know you're watching, so listen carefully. I have repeatedly called for you to fire Director Mark Smith, and I will do it again and again and again until he's gone. These problems must be addressed.
Governor Pritzker's campaign fired back at Bailey after his press conference, citing Bailey's budget votes over the last several years. A campaign spokesperson said in a statement, quote, "Bailey cannot be allowed to continue to hypocritically grandstand when it's politically convenient after years of voting against the very programs he now claims to care about." When we come back, we sit down with Senate Republican Chapin Rose, who sits on the Legislative Audit Commission. We will discuss the ongoing issues at the Department of Children and Family Services.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We're now joined by Senate Republican and member of the Legislative Audit Commission, Chapin Rose. Thank you so much for joining us, and I want to start here. During that hearing earlier this week, DCFS Director Mark Smith called DCFS one of the best child welfare agencies in the country. I want to start by just getting your reaction to hearing him say that.
Yeah, he's delusional. Most states don't have child welfare directors who've been held in contempt of court, let alone a dozen times, as Director Smith has been held in contempt of court by judges around the state. He is, whether you look at the individual cases and the tragedies like Tanaja Barnes or just the day-to-day administration and mismanagement of this agency, he is way out of touch with what citizens expect of their Department of Children and Family Services, and he's grossly out of touch with actually helping protect kids in this state. And I want to give you what a couple things from this audit. Just the basics, making sure the kids that are in the state's care receive things like physical exams at doctor's appointments. They missed 18% of the kids for physical exams. Vision screenings, they missed 14%, dental 12%, hearing 56%. Okay. Here's one. Well child visit and checkups are required by not just federal rules, but Department of Public Health rules, by Department of Healthcare and Family Services rules, by the DCFS's own rules, and most importantly, they're recommended by the American Academy of Pediatric guidelines, American Academy of Pediatrics guidelines, and they've missed those. This is an agency that, on one hand is being held in contempt of court by over a dozen times under the Pritzker administration, but on the other hand, isn't even just getting the bare bones minimum of taking care of the kids in their custody. So for him to say that he'll stand it up against any other states in the country, delusional, frankly, maybe charitable.
Senator, you talked about DCFS not hitting the basics in this audit. We're talking missed doctor's appointments, missed dental appointments, unsure of the vaccination status of some of the kids in their care. Were you surprised when you saw the findings of this audit when they were released?
Look, it's, on one hand, you're glad that they're interfacing with respected academic institutions to, look at their guidelines and rules. But on the other hand, I don't need a PhD to tell me to get a kid to their doctor appointment, right? You don't need a PhD in some fancy academic study to tell you to make sure they're getting their dental exams on time, right? Those things you don't need some big fancy study to tell you to do. On the other hand, he spent a lot of time in his opening comments talking about all the things he's trying to do differently and is going to do differently. Look, they've had 3.5 years at this point, right? And this audit is it's atrocious. And by the way, there are two different audits today. There was just the standard audit that goes on every couple of years, but then there was the specific child welfare audit, the child welfare audit that had definitive findings by outside auditors saying you have failed, Pritzker administration. You have failed to keep kids safe in this state. And again, I'll give you another example. Some of the basic documents that were even needed for the auditors to do their job, this administration didn't turn over those documents or even tell the auditors that they existed until after the audit was over. And, Cole, I don't know if you caught that spot where the Auditor General himself, stepped in and said, hey, we didn't even know this whole other tier of documents existed until a year after the audit was performed. I mean, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, the Auditor General really was vocal during this hearing. He really speaking about some of the issues that his office had with DCFS while they were putting together this audit. You're a longstanding member of this commission. Have you ever heard the Auditor General, speak up this much in one of these hearings?
It is rare, and it usually only happens when someone is deliberately, withholding information. Now, the Auditor General stopped short of saying that today, but those are the only other circumstances where I've seen that kind of interaction where the Auditor General actually steps in and says, hey, this doesn't make sense. And in fact, if you look, if you watch the rest of, or if your viewers were to watch the rest of the audit hearing itself, there were other instances where the members of the Auditor General staff who actually performed the supervisory auditors that were in the room stepped forward and corrected and recorrected the director's own testimony and said, well, hang on, that's not accurate. Hang on, that's not true. In fact, at one point, the Auditor General tried to blame some of this on COVID. And they said, wait, hey, we actually didn't even look at those records because we understand you were in COVID. So when you see, findings that, 58% of the documents failed the required, failed to have the required information about the protection of our children, that wasn't COVID. They weren't looking at COVID because they understand that that's probably not a fair comparison when everyone was scrambling during the COVID period. They were very clear, to the agency. Wait a minute, don't blame this on COVID. It's just ineptness. And again, I mean, who gets held in contempt of court a dozen times and then turns around and says everything's fine? I mean, your viewers know the difference.
This was the first time in months that DCFS Director Mark Smith took questions from lawmakers publicly. In that time, he's been held in contempt of court 12 times. Some of those cases have been dropped because DCFS, finally did what the court asked them to do. But if the breaking point for, firing Smith isn't after 12 contempt of court charges, where do you think that the breaking point really is with this?
Well, Cole, this is an excellent point, and I think you need to, how many more times does the state of Illinois have to get held in contempt of court before the Governor Pritzker actually acts, before he actually does something? Okay, 3.5 years in, and we're still being held in contempt of court. When does the governor discharge his duty under the state constitution, the citizen of Illinois, and take all that and throw out the window? When are we going to protect kids? When are we going to protect kids? When's the governor going to act and install someone else into this position that can actually move things forward? And, I'll give you another, we just talked about the protection of kids, but we also have another issue of protecting the frontline DCFS workers. And as you know, we had a terrible tragedy in the Springfield area of a DCFS investigator who was murdered. I have had folks who serve my area contact me directly and say that they had asked prior to all this to go get self-defense training just so they can, try to be as prepared as possible when they're trying to protect children. And they were told, well, you can do that, but you got to take your own time off and you got to pay for it yourself. Then today he says, oh, we're doing that. We've been doing that the whole time. I just don't believe it. I mean, I'm talking to the real people who live and work in my district to protect kids, and they're telling me what's actually happening on the ground versus this guy. To me, it was just another moment where he proves just how incredibly out of touch he is with what's actually happening on the ground in the state.
Senator, this is not the first time that you and your Republican colleagues have voiced your concerns about the Department of Children and Family Services, but also over the years, you and your colleagues have not voted for budgets, which included, raises in the budget for this department. What do you want to see change about the department besides, that's not putting more money into it or changing systems like Smith said this week?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me be clear on this. This isn't me and my Republican colleagues. This has been a general criticism critique from members of both sides of the aisle. The work group that got set up for DCFS among legislators wasn't a work group of only Republican legislators. It was a work group of both sides of the aisle because they were all very concerned about the direction of this agency. And, whether you're Republican or Democrat, in fact, I think you saw the chairman of the committee today, who is a Democrat, was highly critical in his remarks with DCFS today. So this isn't just, the Republicans. I mean, this is anybody with open eyes that can actually see what's going on out there. They know that this system is failing. And, I guess my point is this: Director Smith says he's adequately staffed. At what point does adequately staffed, yield us a better product, right? Because we keep being told we need this, we need this, we need this, and yet we never get a better product. Now, I want to interject one other thing in a conversation, and this is something that I've been bringing up since before Pritzker, since frankly before Rauner. I believe that this agency is tasked with more than it can handle, okay? The people watching this show on the news at 10 o'clock see the emergency investigations where a kid's taken in an emergency situation, or they fail to take a kid, and ultimately, terrible things happen, as in the case of Tanaja Barnes. However, the point I keep making is, what if DCFS only dealt with emergent care, emergent issues? And then you take the aftercare, the more long-term view of what are we going to do with this child? How are we going to successfully try to bring them, either, back into a place with their parents or maybe somewhere else if the parents aren't appropriate. Turn that over to some of the other state agencies that frankly deal with long-term care issues. Okay. Other state agencies deal with, long-term mental health and abuse treatment. I mean, these kids are going to have to deal with that. Other state agencies deal with long-term, like the Department of Aging deals with long-term issues related to our seniors. My point is this: if DC, and by the way, DC has also to focus on things like, credentialing, in some cases, school districts. Okay. Well, if all they did was focus on the immediate care need and then make sure they're getting those decisions right, then let that get turned over to an agency that's probably already better set up to deal with the long-term issues surrounding that child and around that family. We might all, at the end of the day, actually be able to accomplish something because we'll have subject matter experts in their field dealing with only with the issues in their field and not one agency trying to do it all. And I just think, to say it simply, I just think they've been tasked with too much and they're just running too thin. I've brought this up at budget hearings over the years. I've brought it up at internal task force meetings. I've brought up one-on-one with not just this director, but other directors in the past. And there's something about government that they just can't give up their little fiefdom, right? Even when it might be for the better good. And I just got to think that if we took the original mission of DCFS and told them to be great at it, which is the immediate care of children who are in immediate jeopardy, make that their mission, then take the other items and complete them, but turn them over to other agencies that are better positioned to actually handle them and do the long-term follow-up, do the long-term care. Because quite frankly, they're already doing that in other areas of people who are in crisis, right? There's an emergent crisis, and then there's all the follow-up and long-term that comes to try to make something, make lemonade out of lemon, so to speak. But I just think DCFS as an agency has bit off more than it can chew. It's spread too thin, to mix my metaphors. And as a consequence, children are suffering. Children are suffering. And in 3.5 years, I've got the director, 3.5 years of Pritzker and his DCFS director. And what do I have to show for it? I got a couple academic studies and a dozen contempt of court citations by various judges around the state of Illinois. And at the end of the day, getting the simple basic thing of getting a kid to a doctor's appointment isn't happening. That's it. It's not happening. And so let's concentrate on what needs to be concentrated on. And again, but when the director responds the way he does today, it's hard to get legislative backing to come in and do some kind of wide-ranging, deep dive into scope and who else might, what other agencies might be able to handle these services better, because you really do need the agency's cooperation to do that.
Senator Chapin Rose, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
When we come back, we sit down with House Democrat Lashawn Ford to discuss the big movement in the state's marijuana market this week. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. It's been a little over 2.5 years since Illinois legalized recreational marijuana. And this week, we found out the latest tax revenue numbers, and they were record-breaking. Joining us now is Democratic Representative Lashawn Ford. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you for having me.
I want to start here. The $449 million of state tax revenue that came in from recreational marijuana sales in the past fiscal year was a 50% jump over the previous year. Were you surprised to see the numbers get this high?
Absolutely not. I mean, when you think about recreational marijuana over the years, it's always been something that people used. And when we saw the line on the first day of the opening of recreational marijuana being wrapped around corners, we knew that this was going to be a cash cow in Illinois.
Do you think there's more room to grow? We're obviously going to have more dispensaries opening up in the state, but when does Illinois start to reach that ceiling on exactly how much is going to be sold?
Well, this is an enterprise, this is a business, and I think that what you're going to find is competition, and you're going to find that people are going to be seeking dispensaries that are the most healthy, that have clean marijuana that they could trust, marijuana that they like. So you can have as many as possible. It's all about competition and making sure that consumers get what they want and what they're seeking.
Well, there's plenty more competition on the way because just at the end of last week, Governor Pritzker announces that nearly 150 dispensary applicants are finally going to be issued their licenses. This is the culmination of a 2-year-long effort to fix the licensing system that was put up when weed was first legalized. You were one of the driving lawmakers behind some of those fixes in the legislature. To see these licenses finally go out, is it fair to say problem solved, or is there still more work to do with that process?
No, what we know is that the cannabis industry in Illinois is more diverse today. License holders are Black now and brown and majority owned by women, white women, and we now have a more diverse possibility. It doesn't change the fact that these businesses still need revenue to upstart and to be competitive. So we need to make sure that the state not only issue licenses, but in order to have a diverse market in ownership, we have to make sure that we support small businesses that are social equity license holders. And that's important. We have to make sure that social equity applicants maintain their licenses and maintain their business, and they're able to be competitive. Otherwise, communities that's been left behind will never have an opportunity to experience a legal dispensary in those neighborhoods.
How do you walk that line, though? How do you walk the line of, kind of upholding the new licenses, the new dispensaries, the minority-owned businesses, while also making sure they're not put at too much of an advantage against the current dispensaries that are in the state?
Well, I think that the current winners are already at a disadvantage from the current dispensaries that's open. Right now, you have people that just received their licenses in the mail while they're already competing with people that's been in business for over 2 years or longer because they started out with medical cannabis. So the best that we could do right now is to make sure that we support social equity applicants so that they can grow and scale. To think that we're going to be able to compete at a level that a dispensary that's been operating for years and that have so much capital as in revenue is we can't be deceived. We have to be realistic. So, we want to make sure that people at least get in the mix. And I think that supporting people to make a strong business possible is our first step, and not worrying about them competing against big industry owners. Small businesses, they do well. Small businesses could do well while big businesses exist. So
there are more dispensaries opening, but there's also going to be more grow sites opening as well. both craft growers are going to be able to open up, as well as some other just growing facilities in general. That combined with more dispensaries, it's reasonable to believe that this could lead to a drop in prices for marijuana products in these dispensaries. Are you worried, or is there a possibility that leads to more sales, or do you think this could be the peak that we see as far as revenue for the state?
Anytime you have more of anything, the demand becomes it's not as competitive. And that's why it's going to be up to the owners of the craft grow, the dispensaries, to be the best that they could be so that they can lure in the customers. I'm not concerned about a flood in the market. What I'm concerned about is social equity applicants being able to compete in the market. That's what I'm concerned about, because if they're not able to grow and if they're not able to open their dispensaries and grow cannabis, then we have a problem. But too much business is never bad. The more business we have in Illinois, the more revenue we generate, the better off the state is.
From the, and going off of other state policies here, some of the complaints I often hear from dispensary owners are about the tax structure around marijuana sales. Obviously, the taxes are pretty high around marijuana products. As we start to introduce more dispensaries and more grow sites, do you foresee the state kind of taking a look at that structure again? Because that from when I talk with industry officials, they say that's one of the biggest ceilings they see. With taxes being so high, it's still driving people to that illicit market for marijuana.
Yeah, the state has to pay close attention to that. And I think consumers and owners of dispensaries, they should work together to make sure that they protect their investment. And that means that you subscribe to the belief and the philosophy of Lyndon Johnson, and that is make the legislature do it. And if they see that the tax structure is bad, I would recommend highly that the industry come together with consumers to drive those prices down as relates to the taxes that's being charged. It's going to be tough because for the government to do it on its own without a push from the consumer and the industry owners, because how often do you see government relinquish tax revenue? So I would urge that if the business owners and the consumers see the high taxes being a problem, that they step up and make some demands.
All right. Representative Lashawn Ford, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Cole, and you have a great day.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week, when we will be joined by both candidates for the Illinois 13th Congressional District, Democrat Nikki Budzinski and Republican Regan Deering. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Hankey. Stay connected to the Capitol all week. Follow us on Twitter at CapConnectIL or watch reports from our Capitol team on WCIA3. You can also find us on Facebook or WCIA.com.